What's going on, guys? This is the Red Rogue, and today we'll be doing one of hopefully many episodes where I'll be putting together some talent, conduit, and legendary rogue builds to see how they perform. I plan on doing this for all specs, but today's episode will be one that I've been very excited to try out. So let's see what we've come up with for Outlaw Rogue in today's episode. So I've gone over all of the currently confirmed rogue legendaries and conduits in prior videos for each subject, so if you want a full breakdown of all of them, then you can check out the Shadowlands rogue playlist I have on the channel. I'll give a brief breakdown of what I'm running in regards to talents, conduits, legendaries, and stats, though do take into consideration that there is plenty of tuning or balancing to be done. So any legendary or build that seems supremely overpowered / broken probably is. Due to this, I'll try to only test things that aren't completely broken, but we're still trying to figure out which things are working as intended a la Blizzard. These test runs will be done in Mythic Plus, where it's pretty likely that the go-to legendary for most rogues is going to be Mark of the Master Assassin, simply due to its consistency and the ability to burst on every trash pull basically. However, I wanted to see if any other combinations might be able to give it a run for its money, or at least were fun to use and play with, especially since conduit swapping is locked behind a once per week change on each soulbind tree. It might not be something you're keen on just throwing around these things once this hits live. I always do recommend experimenting and trying things for yourself though. Even me explaining all of this in pretty good detail might not give you the full picture of how it's going to play, and Blizzard may eventually change their mind about only letting you change conduits once per week. Okay, enough exposition, let's look at the setup. So we'll be starting our maiden voyage as Outlaw. I have a Zera clone for each Covenant already, however the one that I've been most partial to so far is Necrolord, so we'll be trying this build out as a member of the Necrolord Covenant. I will most likely try the same build out with the other Covenants just to see if maybe it works better in other scenarios, but that's something for another episode. I'll start with the legendary I've chosen to try this build, which is Guile Charm. This legendary gives Outlaw the old Bandit's Guile buff system back, which a lot of combat rogues will most likely remember. Basically, as you use Sinister strikes, you will get a damage buff. There are 3 different tiers to this buff: Shallow Insight, which is a 10% damage increase, Moderate Insight, which is a 20% damage increase, and Deep Insight, which is a 30% damage increase. To reach each stage of Insight takes 4 Sinister Strike hits. Now that doesn't mean Sinister Strike casts. If Sinister Strike procs an extra hit, that counts as an extra hit towards your total, reaching your next level of Insight. You always start off with no Insight, so you need at least 4 Sinister Strike hits to enter Shallow Insight. Shallow and Moderate Insight only last for 15 seconds, so you have to use Sinister Strike at least 4 times, maybe less than that if you're lucky with procs, to transition up to the next stage. Once you reach Deep Insight, you will stay in this 30% damage burst phase for 15 seconds, and then the cycle will start over at 0 Insight. So basically, the idea behind this build is to have Sinister Strike proccing and being used very often, meaning we should be getting into Deep Insight very quickly as soon as we leave it. Up next we have conduits. Currently there are only 4 Outlaw Rogue specific conduits, and every Covenant has 1 Rogue specific one. I've already covered all of the spec specific DPS conduits for rogues, so if you want to see the ones for subtlety and assassination, I'll link the video up top. So first and most importantly, I chose Triple Threat. This is a conduit that causes Sinister Strike's extra hits to have a chance to proc even more Sinister Strike hits. All of these conduits are rank 1 by the way, meaning they are at their lowest performance level, so this may change outcomes in the future for this build, if they even keep the rank system thing in the game, because we haven't even been able to upgrade the ranks of these yet. This conduit is basically the reason I thought of this idea in the first place, which I'll explain as we go over the talents. The next most important to this build is Ambidexterity, which causes our mastery, Man Gauche, to have a higher % chance to trigger, but only while Blade Flurry is active. This is another very interesting addition to Outlaw, as Blade Flurry is very likely to become part of our single target rotation, and we're able to keep an exceptionally high uptime of Blade Flurry now since it's affected by all of our cooldown reduction effects, such as True Bearing and Restless Blades. Lastly, Count the Odds. This isn't a huge make or break thing for the build, but it does have a chance to give you free buffs, and free buffs are always good buffs. This will happen anytime you use Dispatch, Ambush, or Slaughter on a slight % chance. If you use it from Stealth, it's a higher % chance. For Soulbind trees, I admittedly haven't unlocked any of the other ones yet for the Necrolord, so I just used the initial one you get, which is Plague Deviser Maraleth. It's entirely possible for one of the other 2 Soulbind trees to end up being a better option, but right now I'm just concerned about being able to use 3 potency conduits. So now we'll talk about talents, and what I'm trying to do with them. Again, this is just an idea I'm trying out, so I don't know if this will be a viable option, but I figured it'd be a good time to start trying these weirder combinations of things out, since we won't be able to swap conduits more than once a week once they're socketed into our Soulbind trees when this goes live. First and foremost, I'm trying Weapon Master. Yes, Weapon Master. The reason I'm considering this is because I'm trying to stack up the likelihood of Sinister Strike proccing in addition to Triple Threat, as all of these procs will help our Guile Charm Legendary start to ramp up really quickly. I'm also running Vigor due to this, as I really don't plan on using Pistol Shot at all even with opportunity procs, since I want to get as many Sinister Strikes out as possible, and we're not even using Quick Draw in this build, so we're not getting the extra damage bonus or extra combo points out of Pistol Shot anymore. Unless I'm too far away or energy starved or something. Alacrity is the old reliable talent to this build, so I figured 10% more haste couldn't hurt. And lastly, Dancing Steel. This is a given for Mythic Plus, but now it also serves the benefit of slightly improving our single target damage due to the Ambidexterity conduit. Ideally, we want Blade Flurry active for as close to 100% of combat time as possible, and this will help us do that. Stat-wise, I did something unorthodox and probably not correct. Basically, I winged it and I put on a virtually even split of all 4 stats: Crit, Haste, Mastery, and Versatility. Due to Ambidexterity increasing the proc rate of Mangosh, I figured the value of Mastery should improve to some degree. Our Mastery is also buffed by Versatility, so I figured a healthy amount of that wouldn't hurt. And Versatility is generally a good stat for Outlaw anyways. Crit is the other safe bet for Outlaw since it's basically been our best stat since the beginning, and Haste in the early game of an expansion never hurts. I might eventually try and go full tilt and only stack 1 or 2 stats in the later revision of this build, but I figured I might as well try an even split for the beginning. So how does Outlaw play with this? Well, like I mentioned before, basically you have to keep Blade Flurry active at all times, even in single target. This is because of Ambidexterity, and on top of that, activating Blade Flurry does a nice burst of damage to up to 5 targets around you for a very low amount of energy. Serrated Bone Spike as a Necrolord helps as a cheap generator and is just good to put on numerous targets at a time for the damage that it does and the combo points it generates, helping improve our cooldown recovery and throughput. I basically didn't use Pistol Shot hardly at all, except when I got an opportunity proc and the target was too far away or I was energy starved, as you're basically banking on only Sinister Strike procs for this build. As an added benefit, your Covenant ability damage is affected by the Guile Charm Legendary as well, so for instance, Serrated Bone Spike hits 30% harder and the dot ticks 30% harder while Red Buff / Deep Insight is active. The biggest downside I've noticed so far when playing this build, at least from what I felt, is that if you're proccing your Deep Insight buff right when a trash pack is dying, you'll be wasting a lot of damage bonus, and depending on how quickly / slowly you're pulling the dungeon, it can be kind of frustrating to have that happen over and over. You could of course intentionally weave in Pistol Shot spamming or Bone Spikes for combo point generating for a bit, but that defeats the purpose of weighing so much of your potential damage on casting Sinister Strike non-stop. It definitely can deal some very good AoE damage, though again numbers are very subject to change. This build definitely requires targets to be alive at least for the 15 seconds of Deep Insight for it to really start to feel potent, and it also feels much stronger when you roll things like Skull and Crossbones, Broadside, and Ruthless Precision. This is kind of a seat of the pants sort of feel when it comes to that, but Skull and Crossbones does seem to be positively affecting this Sinister Strike loop, which again makes you get into red buff much more often. Broadside of course being a combo point bonus damage increase, and Ruthless Precision being crit, which is always good. Stat-wise, I'm honestly not sure what this build will really use if it becomes a real build. So I kinda just winged it and put on an even spread of all 4 just to see what it felt like. It seemed fine, but again, I'm probably gonna try stacking just a ton of haste or a ton of crit or a ton of mastery just to see if it does more damage or feels better or worse, just to get an idea. Overall though, I really liked this build, though I'm going to be trying a couple others to get a really good comparison in terms of damage output as of now. Due to most of this relying on Sinister Strikes, auto attacks, and your mastery procs, the damage variation didn't seem too bad actually. Since Guile Charm is just a flat bonus damage to literally everything you do it seems, which is a plus. Again, if you end up in a bad overlap of Deep Insight proccing at the end of pulls, this can become something of a disappointing build, which is potentially likely on lower keys where the enemies are dying a little too easily. Having a weak aura or an add-on to track your Insight buff level would definitely help, though I don't know if you can track how many Sinister strikes into it you are. If so, that'll be freaking amazing, and I'll take a peek into it or see if I can throw one together, or if someone's already done it, then that's cool too. I want to do a bunch more testing with this build, but I hope you liked taking a sneak peek at some of the potential ideas you can put together in Shadowlands as far as these builds can go. Let me know in the comments if there's a particular legendary or spec you want to see next, though I will forewarn you there are quite a few legendaries that aren't quite working correctly yet, so I might have to wait on some of your ideas. If this sort of video was entertaining/interesting to you, I'd like to welcome you to check out the rest of the channel. I do new uploads every weekday and do my best to answer back to comments and on Twitter as soon as I can. Thank you all so much for watching. This is the Red Rogue, and I'll see you guys around.